Yet again, the time is approaching. A new Nintendo Direct is very likely just around the corner. Nintendo Directs and September go together like Mario Kart and sales, but if anything, the rumour mill is amping up a slightly earlier drop this year, with late August perhaps being a possibility, and so I've been scrabbling to get this video out a little sooner. So in this video we're going to look through the options for the Direct release date, the content of the Direct, and as a bit of a bonus, at the end I'm going to do a quick rundown of my last set of Direct forecasts to see how close to target I was for the June Direct. Also, this time I'm doing something a little different. In the notes underneath the video there's a link. The link will take you to a quiz that you can fill in to file your own forecasts for this Direct. Just like mine, you have the options to rate a number of statements as a 10%, 30%, 50%, 70% or 90% likelihood. The idea is that the 10% shouts should come true about 10% of the time, the 30% shouts about 30% of the time, and so on. I've put a whole bunch of different possibilities, and all you need to do is fill in your percentage forecasts and submit. The idea of this is something called the wisdom of crowds. The wisdom of crowds principle holds that, generally speaking, a large group is much more likely to be on point than a small group or an individual. Outlying concepts and personal biases get ironed out, and you get, generally, a more accurate forecast from larger groups. If you want to guess how many sweets there are in a jar at the fairground, your best bet is probably to take as many other people's guesses as possible and then average them out. And if you want to guess what sweet treats Nintendo are serving up in the next Direct, it's time to harness the skills of not just an individual forecaster, but a forecasting community. So this is a bit of an experiment. All you need to do is to complete your forecasts. Depending on when the Nintendo Direct is, by the time this video goes live it might already have been announced, in which case it will obviously be too late to do much before then. But if the Direct isn't for a few days or even a few weeks, I will report back to show what the crowd consensus is, at least from the Nintendo forecast community. Additionally, for anybody who is on any paid tier of my Patreon, if you also enter your name, I'll look to identify who the top forecaster is and possibly shout out any really good calls. I'd love to open this to more people, but time-wise it's difficult to justify individually combing through that many results, but the lowest tier is only $2.50 for the month if you really want to try it out, and there are plenty of other goodies that I'm adding to the Patreon as we go, so please do check it out while you're there. Now, in the interests of making a compelling video, I'm not going to just go through the questionnaire question by question. That questionnaire is designed to have answers that can be easily verified after the Nintendo Direct releases, but in this case I'm going to talk around the possibilities a bit more and build some cases for why certain things may or may not happen. Since by the time this video releases we could potentially have a date or be close to it, I won't speculate too much on the specific moment that the Direct will drop. All I'll say is that historically August has seen Pokemon presentations, and from 2017 to 2021 Indie Worlds tended also to drop in August. But there is a certain sense doing a big Direct now, as it allows them to make a fuss about Famicom Detective Club, which they're pushing particularly through their game teasers. If they waited, they could give the same push to Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, but arguably that game needs less of a push from Big Direct, as they could happily drop a bespoke Zelda Direct and get eyeballs. Whereas if they dropped a bespoke Famicom Detective Club Direct, I doubt many, except for the hardcore Famicom Detective Club devotees such as myself, would watch. The difficulty for something like Emio, the Smiling Man, is that without the attention of a Direct, it would basically stand a high chance of being ignored. So yes, I think there is a 90% chance of a general Direct between now and Christmas, and the most likely time for it is either the very end of August or through September. Another question to consider is the Switch successor and whether or not it will turn up to the party. I do think at some point they need to start teasing games from their new system so that when they introduce it, they have a good suite of games to show for themselves. Of course, you could just announce them all at the system's launch, and that would certainly make a splash, but it also undercuts their abilities to get multiple headlines from their suite of games. When the Switch trailer dropped, there were 4 first-party Nintendo titles shown for it, but fans were already familiar with Breath of the Wild and Mario Kart 8, and Splatoon was a newer game, so the big reveal in that trailer became Super Mario Odyssey. They followed up in January by revealing 1-2 Switch, ARMS, Fire Emblem Warriors, and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but none of these were quite in the same league as a new Mario Kart or Zelda. I think there is a 90% chance that within the first 12 months on the market of the new system, it will see a new 3D Mario title and a new Mario Kart. But the question is, do you want to see them both announced alongside a new console? Isn't that slightly overkill? Remember how the Switch OLED trailer capitalized on the newly revealed Splatoon 3 and Zelda Tears of the Kingdom by showing off these games. These games were not especially close to release when Nintendo revealed them, but I think doing so early gave them a good product to advertise the new Switch model with. Now, I suspect there will be 2 games that we've already seen which will serve this purpose, namely Metroid Prime 4 and Pokémon Legends ZA. It feels possible to me that we will see some jazzed up version of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate or Breath of the Wild, a bit like how Mario Kart 8 turned up on the trailer to the Switch. But I think they will need to show one more original title ahead of time, and that's why I think there is a 50% chance that Nintendo will at least show a sizzle reel for a Switch successor title, probably as the One More Thing. I'm reminded of the March 2018 Smash Bros. Teaser, which didn't show gameplay but introduced the concept, and in this sense, I think the one that makes the most sense to tease is a new Mario Kart. It would make a particularly strong reveal, especially if the next Mario Kart does continue the trend of the Wii U DLC levels and brings in other Nintendo characters Smash Bros. Style. And irrespective of the merits or demerits of diluting Mario by making this another multiverse game, as a shop window for Nintendo's many and varied franchises, it seems to me like an absolute no-brainer to go down this route. Still, my central expectation is that they won't talk much or at all about the new system yet. It's just going to muddle their messaging to get too bogged down with new system stuff, and while it would set a hype bomb underneath the Direct, I suspect there will be other things they wish to push in the interim. So let's look at likely games for the dear old classic Nintendo Switch, and I'm going to start by looking at potential release dates and what the gaps are. Check out this grid from a video on Nintendo's release dates, which I'm currently working on. I've also added on the week numbers and where Thanksgiving fell in those particular years, in America at least. I won't deep dive this fully now, wait for that video on release dates because it's going to be a corker, but this table shows Nintendo's track record of game releases from the end of August to the beginning of December, basically the holiday window if you take it at its broadest. I've used the earliest international date, so for example Fire Emblem Warriors actually dropped much later in Europe and the Americas, but you get the idea. What's striking is that there is a gap in the week before the American Thanksgiving holiday, and Nintendo usually does fill this slot, although it's slightly disguised on here by the changing date of Thanksgiving. Pokemon Sword and Shield was released a week before Thanksgiving week, and in the video I'm working on I theorise as to why that was. What we can see is that there is definitely a gap that is opened up, and it's unusual for Nintendo not to capitalise on this prime game release slot. Also, with a 10-week gap between Mario and Luigi Brothership and Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, we're looking at one of the longest gaming droughts as it stands on the Switch yet, rivaled and exceeded only by the long gap after Xenoblade Chronicles 2, when the Switch was still new and desperate for games, and also from late 2020 to the release of Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, which was of course in the middle of the pandemic. If Nintendo are short on games and are potentially stretching things out until the successor releases, this time of year is generally when they try to ride out a big gap. but I still think on this basis there's a 50% chance that a significant first-party title drops on the 21st of November. If there is no November title, I think a December title is unlikely. I think there's a case to say that with Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, these games needed as much time as could be afforded while making the holiday window. Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp was also given a December slot before it was moved out, and I guess this reflected that the title needed a more comfortable deadline. If you look at 2017 and 2018, there are actually gaps before Thanksgiving where those games could have slotted in, and I suspect that they knew both Xenoblade and Smash were not going to be ready before Black Friday, hence they had the December slot. Meanwhile, Big Brain Battle in 2021 was really the earliest slot in a busy season they could have gone for. Remember, the Switch OLED launched alongside Metroid Dread in October, so anything before that would not have got quite the same attention. Now, if there was really a Switch delay and Nintendo decided to cobble something together in a bit of a rush, we could see a December game, but I really don't think that's hugely likely. Also, this chart doesn't show a late December window where titles like Brain Training dropped in Japan at least. A Japan-centric December game is certainly possible, as Nintendo of Japan are more likely to release things at the tail end of the year, given that Christmas is not quite as significant an event in the Japanese calendar. But I would put a release between Thanksgiving and Christmas at just a 30% shout this year. However, after that, things do open out. We have one announcement for the January to March quarter. 90% chance there's at least one more title, and I'd say there's a 70% chance there's at least two, and a 50% chance that there are 3 more titles to come for this quarter, although whether they'll all be announced in this direct I could not say. It would not surprise me if Nintendo also unveiled something for the second quarter, as this has been their inclination in the past. They unveiled The Thousand Year Door and Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, to name but 2, in the September directs prior, and these dropped in the May. I can't see them announcing much further than that though, unless they're really going to get into the territory of promoting Switch successor titles. Okay, let's look at which developers could be cooking up something for the Nintendo Switch. I think we can more or less rule out anything for the original Switch by the core team at Nintendo EPD, and anything with production led by them feels like just a 10% shout. Evidently, I'm not talking about a potential Mario Kart tease, which would be for the successor system. I just mean a core Switch experience. It's not completely impossible, of course, especially if it's something small and experimental like Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, but at this point in time I really feel like all phases are locked onto the Switch successor in terms of Nintendo's internal development work. I guess the most likely possibility here would be if Nintendo do in fact have a Japan-developed Donkey Kong game in the work. The rumours have been circulating for a long time, and it would draw a bit more attention to the Simian Supremo, but I just can't see why they'd scoop Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. Better surely to announce the new game and then ride the hype train by announcing Donkey Kong Country Returns HD as a stopgap off the back of it, a bit like how Pikmin 1 and 2 were released a month prior to Pikmin 4. That way around kind of makes sense, but while I have plans to deep dive Donkey Kong quite soon now, as it stands, I just don't see another Switch Donkey Kong releasing anytime soon. This reticence to produce Switch titles extends to Nintendo's satellite first-party studios outside the Kyoto hub. Well, mostly. ND Cube already have Super Mario Party Jamboree, and while I think there is a 30% chance they could put out another casual Switch title in the style of Clubhouse Games or Everybody 1-2 Switch before the end of 2025, I doubt a September Direct would be the most obvious place to announce such a title, since it would probably not appeal to the more core gamers who watch Directs. Retro also have a major game on their plate in the form of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and my hunch is that there's only a 50% chance we see more of that title just yet. There is a history of Nintendo letting its big titles skip a Direct before diving in a Direct or two later, and unless Metroid Prime 4 is a March title, there's no particular benefit to cranking the hype machine up earlier than needed. Also, if there's a chance of the next system coming out in late 2025, it still makes sense for a gorgeous title like Metroid Prime 4 to be in that system's launch window. If we do see it, there's a decent chance I'll take the opportunity to shadow drop Metroid Prime 2 and 3 HD, and I'd put some kind of Metroid Prime remaster or port at a 30% chance. However, I really expect that these titles will be like the aforementioned Pikmin 1 and 2, appetizers released quite close to launch. Then there's Next Level Games, who are also possibly overdue a title, since 2025 will make 3 years since the disappointing Mario Strikers Battle League was released, but again, I really think they will hold fire. The only exception I could see is if they boot up a Punch-Out title which they worked on for the Wii, or do an original title. NLG is expanding though, so it's possible to imagine that they could be working on a full-scale Luigi's Mansion 4 and have time for a Switch side project, but I only give a 10% chance to anything from them being announced for Switch in the Direct this year. I do, however, think they're working on Luigi's Mansion 4. Luigi's Mansion has become one of Nintendo's biggest franchises, and I think they have very high aspirations indeed for the 4th Luigi's Mansion, especially bearing in mind that there's a very decent chance there will be some kind of Luigi's Mansion movie in the next 10 years, which means Luigi's Mansion 4 could still be the most up-to-date game in that series at the time the film releases. As for Monolith Soft, I definitely feel like they're done with the core Switch and will be focused on developing for the successor. This is another example of a studio which could tease a new Switch successor game, though as a narrative-based trailer, they have a lot more leeway because they wouldn't necessarily tip the hand too much as to the power level of the new system, and especially if they are in fact going to be launching a new IP, they may want a longer hype window. With so little information about the new console, one of the best ways to get a new IP talked up and up and up is by strapping it to the hype train for Switch 2. If that new IP gets mentioned in every Switch 2 video that goes on YouTube for the next 3 or 4 months, you can guarantee that people will at least be interested in checking it out once it's fully revealed. Of course, one Monolith Soft possibility is a Xenoblade Chronicles X port. It seems crazy to me that any Wii U game has been left on the table when the hardware profiles of the Wii U and Switch are so broadly similar, but it seems to me that if they do Xenoblade Chronicles X, it will be a much more developed remake at this point. They could of course have it as a dual release with the Wii U port on Switch and something more evolved for the successor console, but that seems like a very involved process for a niche game, and so I don't rate the chances. All told, I think it's a 10% chance from me for something Monolith Soft, but I did have a wobble about putting it up to 30%, as I do think the possibility of them showing off a new game for their next system does make sense. So having secured Nintendo's internal developers, let's start looking outside Nintendo at regular collaborators, and here there are a few people who would make promising candidates to have games lined up for the coming months. First up, HAL. Nobody got poor betting on Kirby games to be coming down the chute, and the Pink Puffball has had a quiet year. Although in years gone by they have released Kirby games at all times of the year, in the Switch era the mainline physical titles have exclusively been launched in the February or March window, while the smaller digital releases have been in the July to September quarter. There is still room this September for some tiny Kirby game to drop. It's unlike the Pink Puffball to have gone 18 months at this point without anything new to show. But if not a digital title, a March release seems fairly locked on. I would put it at a 90% chance that there will be a new Kirby title of some description before the end of 2025, and a 50% chance that this one will be revealed in this Direct. I would put the chances higher, except that I think the success of Kirby and the Forgotten Land must have made them realise the potential for more ambitious Kirby fare, and yet they've just released a remaster in Return to Dreamland Deluxe, which satisfied appetites for a while for 2D Kirby. I think it's a little early to expect a sequel to Forgotten Land as well. Now, I've put off doing a full HAL Laboratory deep dive for a while just because there's so much out there to research, and it's kind of intimidating as to know where to even start, but I will get to this at some point, and might be in a position to predict Kirby a little bit more precisely. Maybe they do have the strength in depth at HAL to work on multiple Kirby titles at scale. For now, I'll work off broad hunches and say that there will be another 3D Kirby riding off the popularity of the last one, but it will be early in the lifespan of the next console with the aim of becoming an evergreen classic that can sell for potentially 10 years. So what about the prospective Spring 2025 Kirby game? If it is for retail, it would need to be fairly substantial and would probably be a platformer. Of course, we went from 2018 to 2022 without a mainline Kirby game releasing physically, so if we wait until March 2026 for a new Kirby, that gap would not be unprecedented. Then again, HAL could hook up with another company to deliver a spin-off title. The fact that we haven't had a major Kirby spin-off for retail on Switch is noticeable, but then again there aren't that many of them in the first place. They could always of course remaster Kirby's Air Ride. Look, I'm going to say that there is a very good chance of a Kirby game being announced in the Direct, and if there is a 50% chance of it being a platformer and a 50% chance of it being a different style of game, a spin-off. Not the most exciting forecast, but I think it's just too close to reasonably call. Another studio that's been quiet is the Warriors team at Amiga Force. This is very nearly the longest they've got on Switch without announcing a new Warriors title linked to Nintendo. The difficulty here is that the Warriors titles often push the Switch to its limits, and they may feel that the game would run more comfortably on the next system. Also, there's the question of what to do. Hyrule Warriors 3 would be the obvious one, and probably tying into Tears of the Kingdom. While Nintendo does seem to want to close the book on Tears of the Kingdom to some degree, and so they might have decided not to commission another Zelda title off the back of it, it would still make an enormous amount of sense as a theming for a new Hyrule Warriors game, coming up to 2 years after the game's launch, to have a spin-off title that just gives a bit of extra breeze in the Switch's sales figures. A new Warriors title can't be ruled out either. The success of the last 2 versions, Fire Emblem and Zelda, did really well. I would think the obvious next game to get the Warriors treatment would be Xenoblade, and a Xenoblade Warriors might make the perfect swan song for the Switch, given that the Switch is home to the Xenoblade Chronicles core trilogy. However, remembering that 2025 is the 40th anniversary of Super Mario Bros., and seeing how off-the-wall Nintendo let Ubisoft get with the Mario plus Rabbids series, could it be time for a Mario Warriors title? I really doubt it, but if there's ever a time to try one, an anniversary year might make sense. I give a new Warriors title, I'm gonna say a 10% shot at appearing this time, but I feel like it's a higher 10%. It's at times like these I wish I did 20%, but the mandate of the channel is accountable forecasts, and sticking to 5 clear bands makes it easier to have a sufficiently large dataset to track how the forecasts went. Anyway, moving on. I've covered Bandai Namco in a recent video, and I do think they're some way into development of 2 Switch or Switch 2 titles, probably a Pokemon game and another original title, which I expect to be Mario Baseball. Thing is though, Mario Baseball feels like a summer title. Every Mario sports title on Switch has debuted in June so far, and it would be slightly unusual for them to trail a game like this so far in advance when they could save it for a February reveal. Therefore, I think it's only a 30% chance we will see a Bandai title revealed, but if there is one, it will probably be Mario Baseball. Of course, there's always a chance it could be Kid Icarus Uprising, but I think and hope that any Director's Cut remaster of that title will be saved for the next system at this point. There's also a not unreasonable chance that they could have a Pokemon title they're working on, but my hunch is that this would probably be for the next system at this point. Intelligent Systems are another Nintendo development mainstay. They've had Paper Mario this year, and these games are usually followed by a WarioWare game from the same team to follow up. Now, it might be a little early for one, and especially since they've unusually had 2 WarioWare titles in 2021 and 2023, and they are generally revealed very close to release. I think another WarioWare before the Switch finally dies is far from impossible, but I just don't think 2024 is the time for it. I suspect Nintendo would like more games like Everybody Want to Switch and Super Mario Party Jamboree, which focus on huge numbers of people playing Switch, and WarioWare has a good opportunity to take advantage of this kind of gameplay. So I think it is a 50% likelihood that we will get a WarioWare game by the end of 2026 for Switch, probably another everyone involved title, but only a 10% likelihood we will see one in this direct. Fire Emblem remains another distinct possibility. I've looked at the likelihood of Fire Emblem separately, but it will be 2 years since Engage, which already seems to have fallen out of print in America, so I think a 2025 Fire Emblem title would make a lot of sense. Having looked into Intelligent Systems, Pushmo seems a little further off, given that it's not clear where the development team now are, but a port is still plausible. Also, in my Intelligent Systems deep dive, I demonstrated that a lot of the dev team from the Origami King didn't make the jump to the Thousand Year Door, which makes me suspect that another, perhaps even an original Intelligent Systems project, could be in the works. I put an Intelligent Systems game reveal at 30%. Then there's Camelot Software Planning. I have a particular love for this studio, as they created both my favourite game of all time through nostalgia goggles, Shining Force 2, and my flat-out favourite game ever in its sequel, Shining Force 3, a game trapped on the Sega Saturn so nobody realises just how incredibly groundbreaking and genius it really was. If the next Direct includes an announcement that Sega has hired them to remake Shining Force 3 or create their own Shining Force 4, I may, in fact, explode, but I think that's hugely improbable. At this point, they are overdue a new game, but since they've only really worked on Mario Golf or Mario Tennis titles, or the golf and tennis elements of more extensive sport titles, they've really run out of road on Switch, which does open things up in terms of what they could be doing. The longer it is before the Switch 2 is revealed, the more likely it is that their next game will be different, and since the days are long past when Shining games would change genres more often than Princess Peach Gets Kidnapped, the Camelot of today is fairly conservative in its output. At this point, if Camelot stick with a 3 or 4 yearly schedule, then a 2025 Golden Sun, followed by a 2028 Mario Tennis and a 2031 Mario Golf, just seems like a perfect scheduling for them. So I am currently leaning into there being a 30% chance that they are working on Golden Sun. It's that or something new at this point, since I really don't think Nintendo are that desperate to have Mario Tennis of all things in the Switch 2's launch window. The other, sadly more probable option would be a game that reconstitutes either the golf or tennis mechanics that they've been nursing along for many years now. This could be a casual title, although I think they might not want to step on the toes of Switch Sports, and I do think they're overdue a spin-off in the Animal Crossing genre. I have long thought that an Animal Crossing golf game seems like an absolutely perfect fit. You set up your clubhouse, create your courses, invite your Animal Crossing New Horizons villagers to play, and then go online to try other people's courses as well. Sadly, if given the choice between commissioning a new Golden Sun and a new Animal Crossing golf title, I think we know which would sell more. However, even if such a game were released, I'm not sure whether announcing it now would necessarily be helpful. It's a game that would fit quite well into the late November slot if Pokemon is indeed skipping this year though. We've been iffy about whether Nintendo will meet that lofty 13.5 million systems sales target, but if they drop an Animal Crossing title before Thanksgiving, even a spin-offy golf title, I think they could confidently shift a significant number more units. So I'm going to put a 30% chance of there being an Animal Crossing spin-off game before the end of 2025, and a 30% chance of there being a Camelot game announced in the September Direct. How these specific possibilities intersect or don't, I wouldn't even hazard a guess. But something from Animal Crossing does feel overdue, even though I suspect the next mainline entry is still quite a way off. Good Feel has had 2 big games in the last year or so, which puts them at a 10% shout for a new game being revealed in this Direct, unless of course it's a port of Yoshi's Woolly World. Woolly World remains one of the few Wii U titles of note not to make the jump to Switch. I guess it was left originally because it had a 3DS version, but then so did Donkey Kong Country Returns. With DK's second Switch coming in January, I'm not sure the slate needs another franchise platformer right now, but as King Lear would say, reason not the need, and I'd say there's a 10% chance of a Woolly World port being announced and a 30% chance of something Yoshi before the end of 2025, given that, like Donkey Kong, Yoshi has been starved of games for a while, and there's a ready-made title just sitting on the Wii U, begging for someone to whack the port button. I'm joking about the port button thing, by the way, but honestly, a port couldn't be as hard as a new title to put together, so I really could see it. Platinum have been quiet after the 1-2 punch of Bayonetta and Bayonetta Origins. I think they'll be back with Nintendo, but on the next system, so I'll put a new first-party collab from them at just 10%. WayForward is also 10%. I would love to imagine that they're hard at work on the next Advance Wars title, reusing the Reboot Camp engine for an Echoes of Wisdom style original sequel, but for one, I doubt it's happening. Two, I don't think it will be done yet, just given that WayForward had to delay last time, so they only just got done with the previous game 2 years ago. And three, I don't think Nintendo will be crazy enough to announce this game until as close as they possibly could before their launch point, given how events unfolded last time. I think a game like this would be an announce in June, ship in July or August kind of deal. But honestly, everyone, Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp is joyous. Go buy. Grezzo then. Well, yes, there's Echoes of Wisdom, but could Grezzo be doing double duty? Is there something else up their sleeve? It's been a while since they ported Miitopia, so I think another Grezzo port is a 70% shot by the end of 2026, but it's a 10% chance we'll see anything in this direct. It would be fun if they put one of their original titles, Evo Oasis or Jet Dragon, or even something new on Switch though. My hypothesis though is that Miitopia was a game to get Grezzo's feet under the table of the Mii Tomodachi franchise, which means that as Grezzo expand, they could have a team dedicated to continuing this series. If this were the case, 2025 would be a good time window to see a new Miitopia or even a new Tomodachi Life. Tomodachi was actually a pretty huge game on the 3DS, making the top 10 bestseller list, so its return is massively overdue. Would it fit the Switch successor better? Maybe, in some respects, but the huge Switch install base and the game's casual nature fits a console with a light version, such as the Switch towards the end of its life. Again, it feels like a 10% shout, but maybe quite a good 10%. What about a new collab with an external studio like Sega or Capcom? Feels 10%-y to me. It's possible that it will happen at some point, but very unlikely in any individual Nintendo Direct. That's covered most developers, so now let's quickly touch on different franchises. Will we see a new Mario? You'd never bet against the mustachioed mascot, but given we already have games of his in October and November, I think this is only a 50% chance at this time. In particular, 2025 is the 40th anniversary of the original Super Mario Bros., and it wouldn't surprise me if they saved up his announcements for a big splurge next year. That said, there is one glaring missing entry from the otherwise exhaustive lineup of Mario franchises that have come to Switch, and that is Dr. Mario. I really think if they cannibalize Dr. Mario, they could give it a home on Switch, maybe with a few more features. Dr. Mario 99 perhaps. What about Zelda Beyond Echoes of Wisdom? I think 10% that we will see anything else from Zelda, as they won't want to clutter the Echoes of Wisdom hype cycle. Star Fox, 10% as well. I think we're closer to a new Star Fox than we were to the last one, but that's not saying much since the last one was 8 years ago. But if F-Zero and Another Code can bounce back, I think Star Fox could get some loving. I'm going to say 10% for any Star Fox reference whatsoever, unless it's a Star Fox Assault remaster, which, if only for the people who are upset that I seem to overlook that game constantly, I'm going to give a 10% shout to as well. That may sound like a terrible reason to forecast something, but then again, it's good to listen to people with more expertise than you, so there we go, I'm going out on a limb with it. And on that note, I should talk about port or remaster possibilities, or at least the ones that I haven't talked about yet. I think there has to be a 50% chance we will see a new port or remaster announced. Of the possibilities, I'll put them all at 10% each for a reveal, so Kirby's Air Ride, Zelda Wind Waker, Zelda Twilight Princess, Wave Race Blue Storm, and possibly F-Zero GX. I'd also go for a 10% for a handheld console remake or remaster, 10% for a NES or SNES remake. I do also think Nintendo are trying to build up games with female leads. There are 3 of them so far in 2024, so I think there's a 30% chance that a newly announced game title has a female lead. This is of Nintendo's first-party offerings. Also, while there's no obvious candidate to make these games, they seem so overdue, and so I'll put a Wario Land or another Wario platformer that's at least recognisably in the same vein as Wario Land at a 10% chance. What about NSO? Bolstering the Nintendo Switch Online has to be a huge push for Nintendo in the coming year, as they need that subscriber base to be ready and waiting for the Nintendo Switch successor. Given a new console seems tricky to add, as there's already so much on the online service, I'm dubious that they will continue to add to it at this point, but it is about 18 months since the last NSO console drop, which is one of the longest periods they've gone. I think there's a 70% chance that there's a significant Nintendo Switch Online drop in this Direct, including a 30% chance of a new console being announced. I think a new Sega console would have to be a 50% chance only if there is a new console announced at this point, if only because, having agreed to the partnership for the Mega Drive or Genesis, it seems only natural to do, at the very least, the Mega CD and 32X, if not also the Master System or Game Gear for Nintendo Switch Online. I'm sure Sega have emulators at hand for all of these, and while they will be the best judge on the return of investment that Nintendo Switch Online has provided for them, I'd wager that it's better that they have these games on Nintendo Switch Online than whatever they'd be getting from whatever else they were planning to do with the titles. I think a DS drop, though, is only a 10% chance. It feels to me like they'd want to hang fire on that. However, there are a couple possible places Nintendo could go, including Virtual Boy, Game & Watch, and even Satellaview ports. Given that the Virtual Boy games have returned on Virtual Console, I think there's a 10% chance we'll see Virtual Boy this Direct, and a 30% chance we'll see it added to the NSO service before the end of 2025. A really cool addition, of course, would be the mysterious third entry in the Famicom Detective Club series, Lost Memories in the Snow, and perhaps this might be a cool drop to put alongside the release of Emmy of the Smiling Man. Realistically, though, there's one major dog that is yet to bark in the NSO nighttime, and it is Gen 1 Pokemon. I really think there's a 50% chance that this gets announced. Lastly, some fun ones. I'd say there's a 90% chance will be hosted by Shinya Takahashi. Shigeru Miyamoto appearing is less likely, but far from impossible, given the theme park and the museum, so I put that at a 50% chance. Still, having popped up with the museum in the mid-August Direct, it feels unlikely he'd do an encore, unless he has something separate to announce. Yoshiaki Koizumi often turns up to these things, but not always, so I'd say his appearance is only 30%. Eiji Aonuma has Zelda to tout, so I think his appearance feels like a 90% chance. Generally speaking, we don't see many other people actually presenting the Directs. In fact, have we seen anyone since Doug Bowser? Therefore, while we might see game developers within presentations, the likelihood of another presenter in the interstitial sections feels like about a 10% shout to me. The real way to send a million volts down the spine, of course, would be for Shuntaro Furukawa himself to turn up. I don't think that's really the way the president runs things, but then again, if there was ever a time for him to make a personal appearance, it could be to announce information pertaining to a new system. Okay, I think this video has given a fairly thorough rundown of the possibilities, but before we finish, let's just review the June Direct against my forecast video. I usually wait and review a whole bunch of forecasts all at once. Apart from anything else, it kind of skews the percentages if you only have one 30% forecast and it doesn't come out, because that will give you a score of 0%. With more forecasts taken into account, I could still be on track for 30% overall. Also, sometimes the forecasts I give aren't just for a Direct, so I'm only going to be reviewing those that were specifically for the June Direct, although in due course, probably early next year, I will do a more holistic review of my forecast so far. Still, let's see where we were with the June Direct. First, I forecast another casual game at 30%. I think you could argue that Super Mario Party Jamboree is that, but I was really meaning non-franchise stuff like Switch Sports, Everybody 1-2 Switch, so I'm going to say no, but if you want to count it, feel free. I also said 30% chance of a Shadow Drop remaster, and again, no. I said 90% chance of a first-party title releasing in July, and that's a yes, but a 30% chance it would be Fire Emblem, which no. I said 10% chance of a Warriors title, and there wasn't. A 90% forecast of a no August title releasing, and that was wrong. And I will say, actually, this is a great example of a bad forecast, not just because it turned out to be wrong, plenty of them turn out to be wrong, but clearly the objective likelihood of an August game is closer to 3 in 7 during the Switch's lifetime. So even if an August game was less likely than usual, and I do think it was less likely than usual, I should have forecast this as close to 70% there not being a August game as opposed to 90%. Still, this is a learning experience, and that's why I review these things regularly. I said there was a 90% chance we'd see Mario, and that was correct, with the options being 30% for Mario Baseball, 30% for Mario Party, and 10% for Mario and Luigi. Obviously, we've got Jamboree and Mario and Luigi, so score 2 there. I said 70% chance of Zelda, 30% chance of Wind Waker, 30% chance of A Link Between Worlds, and irritatingly, although knowing the way I think there is a 30% left behind on the table for a new Grezzo game, I guess I got bored before going through the other Zelda options, so no credit for any specific forecast here, even though I know it was in my mind. Metroid Prime 4 was a 30% chance and did turn up, Camelot was a 30% chance and they could be the new Mario and Luigi devs, but I'm feeling pretty confident that this was Ilka, so I'm going to say no. I put a new Mages collab such as a new Famicom Detective Club at 30%. This was a pretty rad forecast, but since Nintendo decided not to use the Direct to announce it, I can't count it. Pushmo I put at 50%, which was really crazy, and I don't know what I had in my cereal that morning. Well, actually, I think it was because I hadn't yet deep dived Intelligent Systems, and after that I became a lot more skeptical about an imminent return for Pushmo, although it still can't be ruled out. Then there are some quick fires. Kirby at 50%, Monolith at 30%, Donkey Kong Country Returns at 30%, which of course was a yes, Punch-Out at 10%, new LLG title at 10%, an NES Remix port at 10%, a Yoshi's Woolly World port at 10%, Way Forward at 10%, a spin-off of an existing title at 30%. Now, does Nintendo World Championships count, since it's arguably either a spin-off of the original competition or, more plausibly, a spin-off of something like NES Remix? It did appear in the Direct, but it wasn't really a spin-off as defined, and so I don't think I can really count it. Captain Toad, Sin and Punishment, Wario, and, I quote myself, something from Balloon Fight, I all put in the 10% realm, and I think Nintendo World Championships does count as something from Balloon Fight, so yes. So remember, I'm aiming to be right 10% of the time about the 10% calls, and I was actually right 22% of the time. I'm not too down though, just because it's absolutely hilarious that the thing that put me way over the top was something from Balloon Fight. If I had been even marginally more specific, I would be on a healthier 11% on this front. As for my 30% calls, I'm right 30% of the time. Can't say fairer than that. It goes downhill from there though, although in my defence, there just aren't enough of these 50%, 70% and 90% forecasts for these to really be statistically valid. I had 2 50% calls and neither came off, so they were right 0% of the time. I had 1 70% call and it was right, so that was 100%. And I had 3 90% calls and 1 was actually wrong, so that is 67%. Again though, it's a cautionary tale to actually do enough 90% calls to be valid, and as for the one that I got wrong, I feel I really deserve that one because I really should have known better. But perhaps you think you can do better, and of course, if you feel a burning forecasting need in your soul, then that form with that questionnaire is still linked below. Likes, subscribes, shares, comments, and of course Patreon subs are all appreciated if you would like to, but mainly I just want to say thank you for watching this slightly longer video and sticking with the show till the end. I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.